President Trump has been pushing the big, beautiful bill, which by some estimates could add more than $2 trillion to our nation's already massive debt. This is contested by many in the Trump administration. But for one recently departed godfather of DOGE, Elon Musk, it's a bill too far. He'd slammed the legislation on X, and Thursday the president responded in the Oval Office saying Musk knew what was in the bill.
And he only developed the problem when he found out that we're going to have to cut the EV mandate, because that's billions and billions of dollars.
Elon responded on X, keep the cuts to EV and solar, even though they're unfair, but ditch the mountain of disgusting pork in the bill. He also said he did not know what was in the bill.
And if you saw the statements he made about me, which I'm sure you can get very easily, it's very fresh on tape, he said the most beautiful things about me. And he hasn't said bad about me personally, but I'm sure that'll be next. But I'm very disappointed in Elon. I've helped Elon a lot.
After the president's Oval Office meeting with the German chancellor, Musk also posted that the president would not have won the election without his support. The president then wrote on Truth Social that he had asked Elon to leave, that he just went crazy after the EV mandate and was removed. In the Oval Office with Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, the president took questions on a wide array of topics, including his latest call with China's leader Xi Jinping.
I think we're in very good shape with China and the trade deal. We have a deal with China, as you know, but we were straightening out some of the points, having to do mostly with rare earth.
Attention was on Russia and Ukraine as well. President Trump said it appears after Ukraine took out several Russian bombers that President Putin wants to keep fighting, and he's inclined to let them.
Yeah, it's in my brain, the deadline. When I see the moment where it's not going to stop, and I'm sure you're going to do the same thing, will be very, very, very tough. And it could be on both countries, to be honest. You know, it takes two to tango.
But one of the topics most top of mind was the new travel ban. The president's banning travel from 12 countries, including Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, Haiti, Iran, and Yemen, with restrictions on 7 other countries, including Cuba and Venezuela.
I'm guessing it is immediately going to court, as with most of what President Trump is doing these days.
Shannon Bream is the anchor of Fox News Sunday.
I mean, when there's no branch that Democrats control, legislative or executive, they go to the courts and listen, that's an option for challenging these policies. It was, I think, the third iteration of the travel ban in Trump term 1 that was ultimately upheld by the Supreme Court, recognizing that, the president does have power when it comes to things like national security and, vetting and our adversaries and those kinds of things. So I'll be really interested to see how the complaints against this travel ban are drafted in light of that precedent. And I think the president's team probably drafted this ban with that 2018 case in mind, that win that they got. So I'll be interested to see what the angle is in going after this one, which is a totally different group of countries.
The president also this week spoke to China's president, Xi Jinping. It sounds like, according to Chinese media, she was insistent that the U.S. should cancel negative measures against China, eliminate interference and the sabotage in relations. And he was really pushing for this idea of cooperation. And yet, at the same time, like just hours before this phone call, we have 2 Chinese nationals, one deported, one arrested for bringing in like a really harmful fungus. And they've been charged with conspiracy and smuggling. I don't think that was mentioned in the call, but the juxtaposition of these 2 sort of experiences that we're having with the CCP, what are we to make of it?
Yeah, and think about all the other kind of awkward things that could have been part of this call and probably weren't, like, oh, we're going to revoke visas for Chinese students or try to block them or trying to block new applicants coming in on student visas. So there's plenty that these 2 could have discussed, but clearly trade was the deal. That's what they were talking about. And, just very interesting that they've invited each other for state visits with their wives. Back and forth. I mean, these 2 have had a really interesting relationship. And President Trump, when he's been criticized for being close to foreign leaders that do not adhere to our ideas of democracy or free society, has said it's better for me to be in relationship with them so we can have these tough conversations. And so that looks like what this is, this back and forth. But the U.S. believes a lot within the White House and beyond, Capitol Hill and others and other economists, that China's economy is really got some troublesome points and that these tariffs are going to make and are making a big difference there. So our president feels like he's got the upper hand, but he's admitted in a posting just, a couple days ago that Xi is very hard to negotiate with. So at least the calls are flowing now.
Colombia having its accreditation possibly revoked. It sounds like this is a Title VI violation, an allegation that they're violating the civil rights of Jewish students. Going to that level of accreditation, that's going to be a fight.
Oh, absolutely. And Colombia feels confident that they have everything in order that they need to maintain their accreditation. They know these ongoing fights are continuing to happen with the Trump administration. And Columbia is one of those schools that folks have looked at and said, okay, they haven't gone full return scorched earth like Harvard has after the administration. They are having conversations. They're admitting they can handle these things better. And they are having, some meeting of the minds on this. But now this latest thing suggests maybe it's, the administration is turning up the heat again on Columbia. Maybe they're not getting exactly what they hoped or thought these talks were going to proceed to. Meanwhile, you have, completely different example of Harvard saying, nope, we're going to file all of these other lawsuits of our own. As you come after us, we're going to come after you. And this microcosm of what's happening with higher ed, and that this administration is saying, things that have been allowed for a long time, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's the way any specific groups are or aren't handled on campus, encampments, things that make people feel afraid and harassed. I mean, you've got to handle them differently. And it seems like some schools are willing to say, we do have a problem. We could do better. And let's work together to figure that out.
Some of this might end up before the Supreme Court. Speaking of the Supreme Court, we have some new rulings. This one particular case involved a straight woman in Ohio who was a county worker or a city worker. She was not promoted, and then she was demoted in her job in favor, she said, of LGBTQ candidates. This was a really interesting hearing because it centered around the notion of reverse discrimination. She is a majority class, right, being straight, but the Supreme Court ruled she could still have a case.
They did, and they said she doesn't have to show up with extra evidence or other background information. They said the lower courts are getting this wrong. If they say, yeah, you are white or you're straight, that doesn't mean that you have to go to an extra level, another platform of bringing in evidence and proving your discrimination case. You've got to come with the same production that you would for somebody who is in a quote unquote minority protected class, somebody of a racial minority or LGBTQ plus designation, or, if you fall into any specific group that's considered a quote unquote minority versus you fall into a group that's considered a quote majority, same level of production of proof. The court just saying, and it was unanimous, everybody has to come to the table with the same level of proof if you're going to make a discrimination claim.
Let me ask you one more foreign policy question before I just get your thoughts on the big, beautiful bill. The president talked to Vladimir Putin. It sounds like he's saying peace is not happening anytime soon after Ukraine took out these Russian bombers. But he then pivoted in his comments about this and said, Putin agrees with him on other things like Iran, that they can't have a nuclear weapon, and that may be helpful in a new negotiation. I just wonder, there are a few moving parts to all of this, but is the president moving away from trying to resolve this? How focused are you on what this means about the U.S. support for Ukraine, especially if the Ukrainian attack on those bombers happened without our knowledge?
Yeah, and that, what we're hearing here in D.C., the reporting is behind the scenes that at the White House and other places that President Trump is calling it, quote, badass, and saying that he was very impressed that Zelensky pulled this thing off. I don't think you're going to see him say that publicly because he knows how upset Putin is. But he had some level, reportedly, some level of admiration for Zelensky being able to plan this thing over 18 months or so and really pull this off. It shows you that these, badly outmanned on paper, groups can actually, countries like Ukraine, they can get creative. Think about what Israel did with the pagers and the beepers and the phones and all of that kind of stuff. People are obviously very creative out there, and especially when they have to be. But it was interesting that the president noted in his call with Putin, he told me he's going to have to respond. Kind of like it's a foregone conclusion. Obviously, it embarrassed Putin and it was inflicted serious damage. But I think that this administration really does want to get a deal done that is a real permanent ceasefire, some peace there in that region. The president campaigned on that promise quite a bit. And he's been exasperated both with Zelensky and Putin privately and publicly. So he seemed to, I don't know if there's kind of this undercurrent of frustration with Ukraine, like, hey, you did something that, was pretty shocking and effective. But it also now pushes back the efforts at getting peace talks done. So, thanks. Seems a little bit of mixed emotions there for the president.
And it does seem interesting because while he makes comments like this, like, well, I think we, it's almost like taking your hands off the wheel a little bit. He then will make comments like, I see the dead bodies. I see these pictures. And he seems to express horror at the continuing violence here, like every time he talks about this issue. So it doesn't seem like it's not top of mind anymore. Let me ask you before I let you go, Shannon, about the CBO this week. The Congressional Budget Office said that the big, beautiful bill is going to increase our deficit by like almost $2.5 trillion. I know there's a lot of debate on this. Like Russ Vought went before Congress this week and said, no, CBO's off. We actually estimate, and it's an optimistic estimation, but we estimate it's actually going to relieve the debt. In the background of all of this is Elon Musk saying, no, this shouldn't pass. Well, are we just going to keep adding to the debt?
Nearly every lawmaker on the Hill thinks so, to some extent, but where they differ is on the offsets for that, because the administration, various members will say offsets are coming from the tariff income that we're getting. Offsets will come from unleashing growth in the economy, and they'll point back to 2017, those cuts, which they're trying to extend in this reconciliation package, and say it did juice the economy and it did help things improve. So they say there will be offsets that they don't think the CBO is correctly taking into account. You know how it is in Washington. When you get the CBO score you like, they're a great nonpartisan body.
Right.
When you don't get the score that you're like, they are dealing with reality and they're not taking all these things into account. So the administration feels like there is built-in economic activity that will be generated that will offset that deficit. But listen, most people in Washington believe we're just going to keep spending ourselves into further crises. And, most of the objections in the Senate, many of them are coming from Republican senators who say, I don't want to lift the debt ceiling again. That's the Rand Paul part of this. And others who think we have not seriously started to cut back on spending in a way that's going to benefit our kids and grandkids.
Yeah, I think Mike Lee was like, it's official. Like the accrued interest on the national debt now exceeds $1 trillion a year, and that's more than we spend on national defense. We had been like right there, but now we've crossed over that bridge. Okay, one more for you.
Okay.
Karine JeanPierre's new book,
Yes.
Independent. This seems hard for a lot of people to grapple with. It seems like on really both sides of the aisle, because she was obviously such a staunch defender. It was obviously her job to be, but it does raise a lot of questions like, when did you start having the kind of doubts you have now? And my question would be a very Peter Doocy question, and that is, do you owe Peter Doocy an apology?
I think so. I think that when it really seemed to spin out of reality was when she, a distance runner in her 40s, said she could barely keep up with the president. And one of the comments from, I can't remember, I think it was the Washington Post, I can't remember, but they said, you might want to see your doctor if that's true. Because there's no way that can be true. And we can see that. So let's just have a more realistic assessment of how the president is, what he's doing, what he's not doing. But for her to now say, like, okay, I'm leaving the party, I'm going to be independent, the system is broken. Yeah, I think the book tour is going to be real interesting. And I would love for her and Peter Doocy to sit down and have a conversation. Because, internally here at Fox, he's been sending out a lot of the back and forth, the questions that they had, reminding people what he asked her at the time, what she had to say. And you're right. Listen, it's her job as press secretary at the White House to defend the sitting president. That's her boss. That's what she does. But there were people at the time, Democrats, that you now see sneaking out from the shadows saying, we didn't have confidence in her. We didn't think she was doing a good job. She wasn't the best person for the job. She wasn't engaged on the policy issues. She didn't have control of the office, those kinds of things. And those people who were willing, while she was at the podium, not to go public with those kinds of, hurtful accusations, are now feeling very comfortable. She's going to have no protection, because if she leaves the party, Republicans weren't fans. Democrats are going to feel betrayed, and they're going to speak much more freely about what they felt were her shortcomings.
Yeah. Well, we'll wait for the book tour. Shannon Bream, thank you so much for joining us.
Interview request going in immediately.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Shannon.
Thank you.